As you heard in Eyewitness News, Donald Trump hosting Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Washington today. But despite the US government's threats of sanctions against countries who seek to prosecute Israel for war crimes, 9 nations have banded together to form a bloc. It's called the Hague Group, in which they claim that they are guided, and I quote here, guided by the purposes and principles enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations and the responsibility of all nations to uphold the inalienable rights, including the right to self-determination, that it enshrines for all peoples. It's the countries of South Africa, Bolivia, Colombia, Cuba, Honduras, Malaysia, Namibia, Belize, and Senegal. South Africa's chief diplomat, the Director General in the Department of International Relations, Zane Dangor, joins me now. Zane, what's the significance of this now bloc that will make a representation or at least a united front when these cases involving Israel either go to the ICJ or go to the International Criminal Court?
So, good morning. So, the countries that met in the Hague are countries that have already joined South Africa's case, most of them. Namibia has indicated that they will be putting their papers in terms of the case for Israel versus South Africa versus Israel in terms of the Genocide Convention. The group came together because there's a significant attack on the ICJ and also the ICC with a view to undermining it, and particularly because of the arrest warrants that was issued for the Prime Minister of Israel. So this grouping is based in the Hague is significant because that's where both the apex courts are. And if you look at the statement that emerged, it is essentially just recalling all the most important UN resolutions, but also rulings of the ICJ, and a commitment to uphold them.
Let me go through some of those declarations. Number one would be that for countries to comply with the ICC arrest warrant targeting Benjamin Netanyahu. Another one says prevent provision and transfer of arms and munitions to Israel, but also to prevent the docking of vessels at any port, if applicable, within our territorial jurisdiction. Let me focus on point number 3. There's something about realpolitik and real international trade. South Africa still trades significantly with the state of Israel. Everything from mineral fuels to fruits to vegetables, even charcoal, South Africa exports to Israel. What's the difference between what's on paper in this declaration and in the realpolitik of any nation's trade with another country?
So most of those countries in that bloc have significant more trade with Israel than South Africa would have. But if you look at the point 3, it says very specifically weaponry. And so, at this stage, we must also be quite clear on what it is we're trying to achieve. And what we're trying to achieve there is to ensure that the genocide is not perpetrated. And the sale of arms, so you can see the sale of arms, which is also in the UN resolution of September 2024, is mentioned. The docking of ships of vessels, it could be any vessel really, that carries weaponry was specifically mentioned. And all of these are in line with South Africa's current legal principles and policies. Of course, when it comes to sanctions, we as DIRCO and others don't have a mandate to implement that. But I think what we're saying is that these countries have decided that the kinds of issues that give rise to and sustain the genocide must be what concerns us.
I'm glad you mentioned that because DIRCO does not have that mandate. So if there is an order from Israel to the state arms manufacturer, the now Arms Corps, it boosts the revenue of a state-owned enterprise that makes ammunitions. Can DIRCO instruct the now Arms Corps to say, you don't sell weapons, you don't sell arms ammunition to Israel?
Yeah, but there we already have an act in place. You cannot sell weapons to a state actively involved in a war. So the prevailing legal position of South Africa will hold. It has to go through the National Arms Control Convention Act, and that will not be allowed.
Zane, broadly, how much attention have you been given Donald Trump's threats of tariffs and sanctions with various issues affecting South Africa, but also many members of the US Congress threatening the South African state with sanctions if it continues to pursue a case against Israel? Does that go against our interest with the US as a major trading partner?
Look, I think we always engage with them on that, and this has been ongoing since we took the case to the court. It was politicians in Congress, but as we point out, that what we're doing is upholding international law, seeking to end the genocide, and we don't see anybody seeking to justify sanctions based on that, because that's why a group like the Hague Group and others, including the countries that we're speaking to outside of the Hague Group in Europe, would not be supportive of that. So we hear those threats, but we will be engaging with them, because what we're doing is actually upholding international law. You don't punish countries for upholding the law. You generally impose sanctions and countermeasures against those who flagrantly breach international law, and you don't see that kind of sanctions going towards Israel from the US.
Zane, as our chief diplomat, the DG of DIRCA, how would you gauge South Africa-US relations at the moment? It was already frosty under the administration of Joe Biden. What does it mean now, a week and a bit into the Trump presidency?
Well, I think we must look at what is going to go, what has happened in the last 2 or 3 weeks. So it's not just South Africa that is being targeted. It's Mexico, it's Canada, it's the European Union, it's China. And I think that we will be part of a basket of countries that will be singled out or targeted for different forms of action. Look, the threat for South Africa isn't sanctions. It's essentially withholding of aid, which is which is PEPFAR money. But we will be engaging with the US and others around the fact that you cannot impose these kinds of countermeasures willy-nilly without actually engaging diplomatically with the state. But we will also be clear that the ICJ and dealing with issues of international justice is something that we're not going to be backing down from.
It was a threat of tariffs from Donald Trump, but there's actually a bill before the US Congress that says if there's any country that would look to prosecute, to execute that warrant of arrest for Benjamin Netanyahu, then they will face sanctions through an act of Congress by the United States.
So the bill is actually seeking to sanction the ICC itself. And we had a discussion on this in The Hague, because it's a real challenge when you seek to sanction an institution that over 120 countries have voluntarily joined. Because if you sanction the ICC, you're actually sanctioning all members, all the state parties to the Rome Statute. If you make it difficult for the ICC to operate, you're actually sanctioning the countries that are working through that, because the ICC then essentially forms a part of the court system of those countries. So we have said this in The Hague, that we must also ensure that the institutions of global governance, and here we now have to include the UN itself, the ICJ, and the ICC. We've already seen withdrawal from the WHO, but that's withdrawal. But attacks because of doing their work correctly in terms of the breaches of international law by Israel is one that concerns all of us.
Zane Dangor is the Director General of the Department of International Relations and Cooperation.